It's important to note that a polypeptide itself is not necessarily a functioning protein. So, a polypeptide is just made up of amino acids bonded together. And so, this is what is formed by the ribosome during translation. So, each one of these is just an amino acid bonded together to form this polypeptide. And these amino acids are bonded together by specific bonds called peptide bonds. And whenever you're talking about polypeptides and proteins, you're going to see this word peptide show up a lot. So if you see the word peptide, there's a good chance that it has something to do with amino acids and or proteins. Now, a protein itself is typically where this chain of amino acid actually takes on a three-dimensional shape, meaning that this amino acid is going to start folding around itself. So it's not just going to be a long strand of amino acids, it might be kind of a big glob, and there are kind of different shapes associated with that. So there are actually what we call 4 levels of protein structure. And we're going to talk about those on the next several slides. All right, so the polypeptide that was made during translation is actually the primary structure. So this is just that chain of amino acids bonded together to form a polypeptide. In the secondary level of structure, what happens is that you have these amino acids here that are bonded together in this polypeptide. But remember that these amino acids, even though they have the same basic structure to them, they all have this different side chain sticking off of them. And remember, we just kind of use this R as a placeholder, but sometimes these side chains are just like a hydrogen. Sometimes they're these kind of bigger molecules. Sometimes they're these long chains of carbons. So they're taking on all these different shapes and sizes, and some of them are hydrophobic, some are hydrophilic, some are polar, some are nonpolar. So there's a lot going on with these side chains. And what happens is that sometimes these side chains are attracted to each other, and other times they are repelled by each other. And because of these attractions and repulsions, what we end up with is this shape that starts to form. And so the secondary structure are these amino acids that start folding into either these what we call pleated sheets, and these are called beta pleated sheets, and that's the Greek letter for beta. Or they form these these spirals called alpha helices. And so that's just these amino acids starting to fold into these different shapes. The tertiary level of protein structure is where these alpha helices and beta pleated sheets start to interact with each other, and they start to fold and bend around each other. So you can see here we have these beta pleated sheets, and we have these helices, and those side chains are still interacting with each other, but now they're causing the helices and the pleated sheets to now kind of bend and fold around each other. Now, in some proteins, the tertiary structure is all that it needs in order to be a functioning protein. So some proteins stop at the tertiary structure level, but some of them go into what we call the quaternary structure, which we'll talk about in the next slide. So as I mentioned, the quaternary structure is not present in all proteins, but it is present or required in some proteins. And what happens is you end up with multiple polypeptides that actually go through their secondary and tertiary structures, and then they end up combining together. So as we see in this picture here, we actually have 2 different polypeptides that have formed their alpha helices and their beta pleated sheets. They've folded into their tertiary structures, and now they're connected together to make a quaternary structure. And in this image, we're only looking at two, but there are some proteins that have even more of these polypeptides bonded together. For example, hemoglobin is a protein in your blood that carries oxygen. And hemoglobin is actually made up of 4 of these polypeptides bonded together. So it's a pretty big protein because it's got these 4 polypeptide subunits that are all kind of bent around themselves and bonded together to form this functional protein. So this slide is just showing you an overview of those 4 levels of protein structure. So as you can see, we start out with our polypeptide sequence here. So this is just our chain of amino acids forming a polypeptide. Those side chains interact with each other to make the beta pleated sheets and the alpha helices. They then bend around each other to form the tertiary protein structure. And remember, some proteins stop at this level and they're functional and they're good to go. But other proteins might need to go to the quaternary structure, meaning that they need multiple polypeptides bonded together in order to function as a protein.